How many folks are on this panel? About 6 or 7?
11.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay, we are streaming and I made both of you co-hosts and I'm letting people in. So if you're on and I'm trying to promote you to panelist, you have to accept that on your screen.
I think I'm already a panelist, am I not? Since I could share screen.
Yes, anybody whose picture we see is a panelist. It's only the people who are under attendees that need to be promoted to panelist.
Oh,
And those people will get a pop up on their screen and can come into the meeting. But you're a co-host, so you actually have the power now to do that if you.
are you seeing Don Horton's email?
Yeah, I'm working on it.
Okay.
And Michelle, are you sending him the registration if he didn't?
Yeah, I'm resending that to him.
And I can see if he registered.
I'm going to highlight that registration part of the email.
Katie, was I supposed to be a panelist? I declined it the first time.
Yes, in order to be on video, you have to be a panelist.
Hey, Steve. Hey, Bob, Tom, Ashley.
Hey, Mark and everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello, Jennifer. Hi, Jim. Hey, Ross.
Hello, everyone.
Good to see you. Let's put it on. Boy, Don's got the zoomable camera. That's impressive.
You can see all my flaws that way.
If I do that, see, all I can zoom too. I just move my chair back.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think we're set to go unless I hear any technical difficulties, or I think we're streaming now. Okay, well, I will get us started. Thank you for joining today. Just wanted to welcome all the members of the committee, and as well as if there's any public watching. This is being streamed on YouTube for the public. So we are here today to discuss the Oregon Administrative Rules in Chapter 736, Divisions 6 and 7, the rules governing the Local Government Grant Program and the County Opportunity Grant Program. And this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on our rulemaking site. So with that, well, let me go over, let's see. If we can, hopefully everybody's here for this, the Rules Advisory Committee meeting. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started with the introductions. We do have a limited amount of time here today, so I'm going to do a quick roll call, and I'll just let you each quickly introduce yourselves and just say your association or organization that you're affiliated with, and then I will do the committee members first, and then OPRD staff after that. So, and if I miss anybody, please speak up or let me know. So in no particular order, I don't think, we have Jennifer Holland.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Holland, Executive Director with Sisters Park and Recreation District, and I'm also a board member on SDAO.
Hi, thanks, Jennifer. Ross Hoover.
Hello, greetings. I'm Ross Hoover, Director of Parks and Recreation at the City of Tualatin.
Hi, Ross. Don Horton.
Hello, I'm Don Horton. I'm the Executive Director for Bend Park and Recreation District. Glad to see everybody.
Hi, Don. Jim McElhenney.
Hi, hopefully you can hear me. Jim McElhenney. I'm a past employee of the Tualatin Hills Park and Recreation District and two-term member of the Local Government Grant Program.
Good to see you, Jim. Steve Lambert.
I'm Steve Lambert. I'm the Roads and Parks Director for Jackson County.
Hi, Steve. Ariel Nelson.
Good afternoon, Ariel Nelson with the League of Oregon Cities on the lobby team focused on housing, land use, and community development.
Welcome, Ariel. Bob Kiefer.
Hello, everyone. Bob Kiefer. I serve as the chair of the Oregon Outdoor Recreation Committee, which oversees the Land Water Conservation Fund grants, among other things I've done over the years.
Yes. Hi, Bob. Good to see you. Tom Sayre.
Hi, Tom Sayre. I serve on the LGGP Advisory Committee.
Hi, Tom. Brian Carroll.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Carroll. I'm the Lynn County Parks and Recreation Director and a member of the County Opportunity Grant Program Committee.
Welcome, Brian. And then Michael Burdick.
Hi, I'm Michael Burdick. I'm with Association of Oregon Counties. I'm their Legislative Affairs Manager for Community Development and Public Safety.
Welcome, Michael. And that's all I have for committee members. Did I miss any committee members? No. Okay, and for staff, we have Mark Cowan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Cowan, and I have responsibility for coordinating the local government grant program and the county opportunity grant program. So thank you very much for being a part of this committee today. We appreciate it.
Katie Gothier.
Good afternoon.
Your phone is,
Oh, sorry. Good afternoon. Katie Gothier. I work on legislative affairs, policy, and administrative rules. Thanks.
And Ashley.
Hi, yes, I'm covering for Brandy this meeting, and I am one of OPRD's agency support specialists.
Thank you, Ashley. We appreciate you coming and taking the minutes for us. I really appreciate it. Well, thank you all. And I'm going to go over the agenda real quick and just a couple items, and then Mark will take over. So this is the overview of today's agenda. We're going to do the background process description and meeting goals. So we'll be providing some background on local government grant program and the county opportunity grant program. We'll discuss the rulemaking process and the goals of today's meeting. So the proposed rule review, we will discuss the impact to existing users, wording of the proposed rule change, implementation concerns, and other issues to consider. We also will be doing a discussion of fiscal, economic, and racial impact, and this is required under the administrative rule revision process. And the committee also will discuss any economic impacts to small businesses. And then we'll do finally a wrap up and next steps, the processes that will happen after today, and then the timeline. And I will pass it on to Mark.
Thanks, Michelle. So the purpose of today's get together and of course the previewing that you've done leading up to this, we felt it's time to just simply update a lot of the administrative rules. Some of them have just simply become outdated. There's a lot of these were set up to function on a biennium schedule, and we have just moved away from that. We operate on an annual schedule now, so we just want to make those types of updates. We'd also like to change the maximum grant amount allowances within some of these rules. Number one is simply inflation. Inflation is we're all acutely aware of that right now, and a lot of our grantees are seeing inflationary pressures on a lot of their existing projects. And then also we've got this looming thing coming up where the funds coming in from the lottery to OPRD are going to change from 12% to 25% going into the grant program. And so we want to give ourselves a little latitude to be able to have larger dollar amounts in the grant packages to kind of keep consistent with the dollars that are coming in. We want to have a little more flexibility there too. And we'll talk about a little bit more about that later. And then that third bullet point, we want to leave ourselves nimble enough to address small and underserved communities. We'd like to make sure that dollars are flowing in that direction. And so we just want to make sure that the language within the rules doesn't restrict us from doing any of that. Again, on the county opportunity grant side of things, similar changes. We just simply want to update the rules, particularly the ones that have to do with dates that we are really no longer adhering to, that they become outmoded. We're operating on an annual schedule in that program as well, rather than a biennial schedule. And then again, just to give ourselves, make sure that we have a little bit of flexibility in how we operate that program. Excuse me. And again, as Michelle mentioned, we will kind of go through the goals of this. Thank you again for your involvement here. You represent a lot of the people that are affected by these rule changes, so we value your input. And your role will be to provide recommendations to us, both on the rules that we have already put together that you've had a chance to review, and then any additional items that you might want to interject. And I want to discuss impacts on existing users, some of the wording possibly, implementation concerns, any other concerns that you might see as we'd want to consider. And then as required by the state, again, we need to discuss the fiscal impacts, identifying state strategies, local governments and how that affects them. So just to give you a little kind of, I'm sure most of you are very aware of what the local government grant program does, but just kind of a refresher so that we're all on the same page. This was established by the Oregon legislature back in 1998. And the intent of the program was to provide matching grant funds for outdoor park and recreation areas for the purpose of acquisition, planning, development, and rehabilitation of outdoor recreation facilities. Eligible applicants are cities, counties, metro, park and recreation districts, and port districts. Lottery funds are the source of the funding, and historically, we've been able to award in the neighborhood of $6 million annually, and that's based on that 12% of the lottery shares that flows into state parks budget. To the right, you can just kind of see a little visual orientation there of where the projects get distributed around the state. You can see we've had a lot of great impacts through the years. Just to give you a little past history, 2019 was really our last normal year in the grant cycle, pre-pandemic. In that particular grant cycle, we received 54 applications. Now that's considering large grant applications, small grant applications, and planning grant applications. Large grant applications are awards from $75,000 up to $750,000. The small grant category is awards up to $75,000. And then the planning grants are geared towards small communities, and those are capped at $40,000 each. So 54,000 applications received in 2019, and we had about $6 million to work with. Then in 2020, that was the onset of the pandemic. We kind of put the whole program on hold midway through that year because we weren't sure what lottery funds were going to do. You know, they closed all the bars and restaurants, and that had a big impact on lottery dollars, obviously. So we picked a dollar amount that we thought was safe and conservative and that we could actually fund. And so we earmarked $5 million to work with that year. And then in 2021, we just didn't even offer the program. Everything was shut down at that point. We didn't know where things were going to land and when we'd be able to open back up again. So we put everything on hold. And then going into 2022, we offered the cycle again, ramped back up, and lo and behold, lottery dollars had started flowing back into the coffers with abundance and got right back on track. And so we basically had 2 years worth of funding to work with. Interestingly enough, the local governments and communities and cities all had an influx of COVID relief dollars to work with now. So they had extra funds to use as match dollars. So consequently, that just ended up in a very robust grant cycle where we received 83 applications in the cycle that we are just now concluding, and we had 14 million to work with. So at first we thought, man, we're gonna have lots of money, we're gonna be able to award everything. And then lo and behold, we had 83 grant applications. So it kind of ended up being, right about where we normally land statistic wise. We were still able to fund kind of the same percentage of large grants, about the same percentage of small grants, and the same percentage of planning grants. Now that bit of legislation that I alluded to earlier in the Oregon statutes, I'll just focus in on this highlighted area here. It says, leading off here, if the amount transferred to the State Parks and Recreation Department fund from the Parks sub-account during a biennium is more than 150% of the amount that was transferred during the 2009-2011 biennium, the state treasury shall, and then jumping down to the next section, transfer up to 25%, not 12%, to that particular sub-account that funds the local government grant program. We've been watching this for a couple of years. And if you can see at the very top of this graph, line 1, the second column over, the lottery dollars to OPRD, 82 million. That was that benchmark year, that benchmark number. So once the lottery dollars hit 150% of that, which is down at the bottom in the blue, 123 million, then it jumps from 12% to 25% of the amount of the dollars that flow into the local government grant program. So as you can see on the right, we're going to go from a $14 million in funding per biennium to $30 million in funding per biennium, which is, as you can see, slightly more than double. So that's part of our reason and wanting to go through these rule changes as well, to just make sure that we're well positioned to handle this influx of increased cash. Just to give you a quick kind of refresher of the kinds of things that the local government grant program can do, and this we can just do just straightforward vault toilet situation out in a mountain biking area, remote situation, all the way up to a very strategic, highly designed inner urban city park like Tully Park up in Thomas Cully Park up in Portland. Nature play parks are very popular. We've helped assist with a lot of those. This is a great new lakeside development just outside of Salem. This is a freeway lake, basically gravel pit lake that's turned into a great swimming hole with local government grant assistance. We can do outdoor swimming pool situations. We do help with a lot of splash pads, outdoor ball fields. This is down in Brookings. Helped with a lot of the field sculpting, the lighting, the sidewalks, restrooms. Trail connectivity is a big priority within the local government grant program. This is out in Hood River. This is the final piece in their complete east to west trail system along the river. And then, as you could expect, this is really kind of the mainstay of our program right here, is assisting with landscaping, restrooms, park shelters, and playground equipment in city parks. So we're going to tackle the local government grant program rules first.
Mark, it looks like Michelle has a comment or question.
Thank you.
Yes, sorry. I just wanted to say, when I first started, I was experiencing some technical difficulties, which we may all do. So I actually didn't get through all of our, kind of my background and housekeeping stuff. So before we dive into this part, I'm just going to finish that up. I realized that I failed to introduce myself. I'm Michelle Scalise, and I am the manager of the Grants and Community Programs section. And then I just want to remind you, unless you're actually speaking or, somebody calls on you, just please mute your phone or computer or tablet, just to, avoid any kind of background stuff. And then if you experience any issues like I have been, please raise your hand or use the question box to let us know what's going on. And as I said before, this is a public meeting, and we're not taking public comment today. However, we will be accepting public comment roughly around October 1st to October 31st. And there will also be a hearing in October, and we'll go over those dates towards the end, where the public can have an opportunity to provide input. And another little housekeeping piece to the committee: please only use the chat box for technical difficulties or any kind of issues like that. It's not for sharing your opinions. We'd like you to, verbalize those to the group. That way, everybody who's watching this is, like I mentioned before, being streamed on YouTube for the public. So that way, people can hear the comments and questions fully. So thank you for letting me interject there. And with that, I'm going to give it back to Mark.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. So I'm bringing up the actual draft of the rules. And can you see them okay? Great. I see some heads nodding. Is it large enough? So
You might make it a little bigger again.
I think we can stay on the screen. How's that? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's good.
All righty. So we're just going to move on down through to the changes. And this is language that's been interjected in here. And basically, this is just a summary of the ORS 390 that refers to that 150% threshold. So we thought it'd just be a good idea to anchor that in here as a reference point. Everybody okay with that? Any comments on that? Okey-doke. This whole next section is all on definitions. And this has really just been just a little bit of housekeeping. We've taken out the word means or means, and traded it out for the word the. Pretty straightforward stuff. Any questions on any of that?
Hey, Mark, this is Bob. Yep. I was just looking at the, and it may not be any issue at all, but under the definition of outdoor recreation, it's says something about are not provided in a roof or enclosed facility. How does that impact things like picnic shelters and shelters over basketball courts that are open air but sheltered? Does that not create a contradictory statement?
We could add a definition for sheltered for support facilities, because those are usually covered under and allowed as a support facility. And I don't know if we have a definition in here, but in the manual, we go into further definition of what we mean by support facility.
I think we have historically interpreted this as roofed and enclosed facility, meaning roofed and four walls.
Okay.
And so we've, but I think Michelle brings up a good point, though. There's probably not a definition for support facilities in here.
Yeah, I think I hear what you're saying now that you read it in that context. I split it up. And so,
well, I mean, it's easy to look at it that way.
Yeah, but that's as long as we know what the purpose is there, because we don't want to be doing all these things and then have a definition that's not consistent with what we have agreed to do.
Sure.
And then on the major.
Bob, I have a question on that one before you go on. And just wordsmithing that, why do we need the word roofed if it has enclosed?
Good point.
That was my thought exactly, Don.
The only caveat I would say on that is, depending on definition of enclosed, could that mean surrounded by walls and have something that's not roofed? And we do have some structures that are that way, believe it or not. We're getting ready to tear them down, but we have some dressing rooms and whatnot that are enclosed that do not have roofs on them.
I think we had some of those out at Lane County too when I was there, out by Fern Ridge, that were part of the restrooms. So,
yep.
So that's probably just what you want to take a close look at and make sure we're consistent. And then I was just going to also, another consistency or concern that I have is about major rehabilitation, normal wear and tear, not attributed to a lack of maintenance. Who defines a lack of maintenance? I mean, some of the stuff will wear out depending on how much maintenance. It'll wear out sooner than later. So how do we determine that?
Usually when we're working with one in our manuals and with the committees, the point of that, which you probably know, is that we typically don't like to fund grants and then have no assurance that maintenance is going to continue to happen, or there are projects that are truly have met their useful life, and then there are some times where things just were not maintained and they need to be replaced, where they only lasted 10 years where they maybe should have lasted 20. So that's the reason for that. We would probably get, I guess it's just kind of review, that's what we have the committee and then the technical review of the staff to see is if that's kind of a routine, major rehabilitation. I don't know if you have a suggestion otherwise, but we will let, if somebody says it's a rehabilitation grant, come through the system, but if it's during the review kind of found that it was something that was just not taken care of, then that's maybe where we would address it. But typically we haven't rejected any applications because of that.
Just being around the state now and seeing some of the struggles that park districts and counties have had, that it wasn't because they didn't want to, they just didn't have the money to take care of something, and maybe it wore out earlier than what we'd hope it would. But I just, again, I just, when we have these definitions, I don't want something to come back and bite us and say, well, you know, you can't do that project because you haven't maintained it, when really it was something that they just couldn't control. It wasn't that they didn't want to, or they were being negligent, and just that circumstances didn't allow them to do it.
Bob, to your point, I think that a compromise could be exactly what Michelle mentioned, and sitting on the county opportunity grant for several years, we looked at that as taking a forward-looking approach of, is the project you're proposing do you have you demonstrated the ability to maintain this project into the future, and not a forward-looking and backward-looking, more punitive approach, but let's correct the problem from here moving forward and not punish you for what you may or may not have been able to do in the past, or frankly, under other leadership may or may not have been able to do in the past.
Steve, I agree with you. That works for me. And absolutely, it's really, let's try to make sure that the funds are being used right, and the facilities are being maintained once we give them those grant dollars, and we have some assurance of that as best as we can. So yeah, thank you for that.
Mark, it looked like Tom had his hand up first and then Michael.
You want me to go, Mark?
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
So I don't want to veer too far away from today's work, and this is probably an agency-wide consideration, but bicycle is kind of a 19th century term. You know, today we see a lot of hand cycles, we see a lot of recumbent bikes, we see a lot of quads on the trails, and I'm wondering if it's, you know, time to, you know, shift gears and bring the language into more current standings. And by doing so, and maybe this is the most appropriate place to mention this, but by doing so, I think we'll create better awareness that could lead to better design for all intended uses.
Okay. My editing ability is taking a little vacation here. We'll do this instead.
I think the word cycles would cover all user groups in a more appropriate way.
Okay. Make that note.
Add non-motorized to that note.
Very good. And very good, Michael.
Yes, my comment, I just agree with the comment that was just made about the bicycles, but I wanted to key into the major rehabilitation and agree with Bob. I think it can be sometimes really hard to distinguish between whether something has become obsolete or if it just hasn't been maintained. I'm thinking of, like, you know, electrical equipment that, you know, should have been replaced a long time ago that is obsolete, but that could have been considered maintenance that wasn't done. And I agree that just because jurisdiction didn't have the money to maintain something in the past doesn't mean that they wouldn't be wanting to maintain the facility in the future. Maybe there could be some kind of provision for, you know, if the problems had developed because of lack of maintenance, maybe there could be some kind of provision to ensure that there's a plan to maintain the future.
Michael, unfortunately, we had kind of a hard time hearing some of your last phrase there.
Just that sometimes it might be difficult to tell the difference between whether something has become obsolete or whether it is suffering from a lack of maintenance, and that a past history of lack of maintenance may not mean the jurisdiction isn't serious about maintaining it in the future.
Sure.
Are we thinking, is the suggestion, or is there a suggestion out there to just stop? I see that it got highlighted there at normal wear and tear, just to stop after accessibility standards, or is there some recommendation from the committee?
I guess that would satisfy me.
My recommendation, Michelle, not to jump in, would be just or normal wear and tear, and just strike not attributed to lack of maintenance.
I would concur with that.
This is Jim. I agree with that too. And I think that the staff in the review process is great at giving background information on the applicants. And that can be considered between the staff and the applicant too as time goes on.
Okay, any other comments on that one?
It looks like Don has his hand up, and then Steve had his hand up.
Yeah, mine goes back to the cycle, and Michelle threw in non-motorized, and well, I would agree that we ought to be designing our facilities for non-motorized, keeping motorized off. Those trails today is almost impossible. You know, we have motorized scooters and e-bikes and e-unicycles and skateboards that are electric, and so I just want to make sure that that doesn't require that we maintain these as for non-motorized only, because in the urban areas we can't do that.
Good point.
I also think that the definition might need to stay in there as bicycle recreation, and I will defer to Katie when we get down to that part, but we have some parts of this rule that specifically will go off the rule. If you've reviewed that, I think in 2024, that has specifically to do with bicycle recreation, but so we need to have a definition of what we mean by bicycle recreation. So we can make a note of this and still look at it, but I just thought I'd mention that.
If I can make one comment along those lines, I understand what Don's saying. It would also concern me not to say non-motorized, putting something in there, because if you don't say non-motorized, maybe the definition of bicycle will define that better for us, because if it opens it up to any kind of motorized option or a vehicle, that's like even the term cycle could mean motorcycle. So I think maybe the definition of what a bicycle is might be where to clean this up.
We have some definitions in our park area rules, and so we could tie, and in statute, so we could tie it to those definitions if we need to change it. But I think Michelle is right. It may be one of those words that we have to keep for a while, but if we can expand it to be a little broader, that makes sense. But if we tie it to statute or other rules, it might address some of those concerns.
Yeah, Katie, one thing I would add to that though is it seems like even the statute's kind of behind the times. You know, that this is an area that's changed so rapidly over the last 5 years that somehow I think, and I agree that we need to have a better definition there. I just want to bring it up is that if it requires that we prohibit that kind of use, that would be really hard to do. You know, like in our case, we have a city government that is encouraging these rental electric bike companies to move in, and they're encouraging them to use our trail system, even though they're not the ones that maintain the trail system. And so we have a really hard time going against our local government on what they're trying to do to help reduce car trips and that type of stuff by saying that they can't use our trail system. So, you know, we allow on all of our trails, we allow the class 1 e-bikes.
Interesting. Yeah, it's certainly a very fluid situation out there with e-bikes and those kind of regulations and restrictions and guidelines.
Looks like Ross has his hand raised.
Hi, thank you. Just wanted to suggest that, yes, the nature of trails and paths, of use of the trails and paths is changing, certainly, as we've all identified. And it feels as though creating a rule that doesn't preclude whatever a particular local agency or city would like to do would feel like the correct path, no pun intended. That giving the local area the ability to make those decisions rather than deciding within the state rules here feels like the best way. Then the locals can figure out the best type of use and how those trails and paths should be managed at the local level. Just a suggestion.
Can I just ask a quick question? Where is the word bicycle, or the combination of the words bicycle recreation even? We're talking a lot about, where is it even referenced in the rules as far as impact goes? Because under the $1 million per year, the bicycle and pedestrian projects, those two combination of words aren't even referenced together. So I don't know how big of an issue it is. I guess that's what I'm saying.
We'll take a look at that here pretty soon. Okay, any other comments on this section before we move on?
I hate to continue to bring it up, but I continue down here. I have some concerns that at the end of the day, with the change in e-bikes and the fast and what design they're going to require, when does it become more of a transportation corridor than a recreation corridor, and we're supposed to be using funds for recreation primarily? So I think there's some bigger issues to look at when we start talking down this road about how many dollars are we going to really put into these type of facilities if they're going to be more of a transportation corridor than a recreation corridor. And I understand they work as both, but it seems to me when we go to, what is it, level 3 bikes that can do 30 miles an hour, that's not something we want our mothers out with strollers having to get out of the way of. So just something to think about as we move this forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Bob. Appreciate that. Okay, moving on. Again, these are all just some syntax changes. Some added definitions here. Any comments on any of that section? Okay to move on. Okay. Apportionments of money is up to 20%. This used to say 15%. So 20% of available funds should be set aside for small grants. Small grants projects with a maximum of 100,000. That's up from 75. Again, we talked about this as just keeping up with inflation and the times, and maybe putting greater grant amounts to smaller communities if possible, and maybe earmarking a little bit more of the grant pool for small communities. How about some discussion on this section?
Looks like Dawn's hand is raised.
So this may be a question that someone on the grants committee or Michelle or Mark, you can answer, but has there been a need to increase the percentage to date in this area? Because you're increasing the percentage from $14 million total money to whatever it was, $30 million total money for the program. And I just wonder if you increase that by 20%, whether or not that's going to be necessary or not. And I don't know the answer to that. I just saw that and it kind of raised a flag for me.
I would say no, it's not necessarily a need today, but it could be a need in the next cycle.
Does that mean, though, that if you get less than 20%, you can't use that money for something else?
I'm not tracking with you when you say get less than 20%.
It says that it says up to 20%. So I guess if you only got applications for 10% of the total money, you could allocate the rest of that to another part of the program.
That is correct. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. This is flexibility. We just want to have a little bit more flexibility, and very could likely, right now, historically, we've been allocating 15%, and that's been meeting the need fairly well up to this point. But if we, if we're doubling the amount of dollars that we have to work with, we see that it could possibly be an increase in applications in that area. And if we somehow come across any other mechanism to make it easier for smaller communities to apply, this could possibly give them a little bit larger pool of money to draw from.
Okay.
I think Jennifer had her hand up next.
Thank you. Just for some context, what percentage of applications get approved? I know you talked about how many were approved, but what percentage overall applied?
Historically, in the small grant category, over the last number of years, we've been able to approve about 85% of the small grant category. And in the large grant category, historically, 43% in the large grant category. Now this year we were able to fund 51% of them. But as you can see, I mean, it's kind of right there in the large grant pool. It's, between 45 to 50%. In the small grant category, it's between 85 to 90%.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciated the number 6 that was added. It gives a little bit more flexibility, and I think that that's a good approach considering everything that's going on. So
right, very good, thank you.
And Steve Lambert is the next hand.
Yeah, so I guess when I'm looking at this type of process, I'm always looking at what are the problems that we're trying to solve and fixing those problems. And from what I'm hearing you say, Mark, and maybe I misunderstand you, is there isn't really a problem currently with the small grant program being underfunded, as far as you've been able to meet the need per what you were saying to Dawn with the amount of small grant requests that are coming through. I agree with bumping it up to 100,000. Just, projects cost more nowadays. But the 15%, if you left it at 15%, that 15% is going to grow, right? Because the whole pot of money is 15% of the whole pot of money. So dropping it up another 5% is going to set aside, like another, just quick math, like 600,000-700,000 of the program towards the small grant program, which is a sizable chunk of change. But I guess my take on it is, if there's not a demonstrated need that we're not funding that small grant program adequately, I don't see the need in increasing it.
Everything you just said is correct. But just to kind of let you know how we do operate this is, like in this particular year, we were able to fund actually all the small grant pool, all the small grant categories, and we had a little bit of dollars left over, and so we spilled those dollars back over into the large grant category. So again, this doesn't mean that we're going to allocate 20%. It just says up to, and we think that this might position ourselves for increased small community grant requests in the future. It just gives us flexibility. But if you're making, if the group is making other recommendations, we would certainly want to hear that. Jennifer?
I like the flexibility from a smaller district, that it's not committing you guys to do 20%, but it gives you that opportunity too. And so I think that's really to the grant committee to vet those projects as they come in. But it's nice to have that flexibility, especially since, how often are these rules reviewed? I think that it's helpful to, with the changing times and that increase of dollars, to at least allow for that, given that hopefully we'll have more smaller agencies applying for these opportunities here soon.
I see Bob's hand, then Ross.
So in my travels since I retired and going out to some of these small communities, I think that, having these funds available is a great need. Most of those communities are also going to have matches that are much less than 50%. When we go out for those small grants, that's where they're going to go. Another item that's here on your list is number 4, is that the commission and director may set the maximum more or less than the above amounts, and you can make changes as you see fit during a grant cycle. So I think by being in consultation with the committee, I think it's something that builds in that automatic flexibility, and we have projects out there that need to be done in our small communities. The number 6 item, I don't know why we don't also be in consultation with the committee before we set a dedicated amount. I think it gives us an opportunity for somebody to really review that decision before the director just makes it on their own. So that'd be my 2 cents on this.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Ross?
Thank you. So it just got me thinking a little bit about how these rules are informed or not by the current SCORP update process. And if we are discussing potential changes to allocation based on city size, it raises the question in my mind about what does the SCORP work tell us, and what are we finding through that work that may indicate direction in how we set these rules. And so I just wanted to bring that up and raise that question, which further got me thinking just about what those priorities and goals in SCORP are, and how do the grant programs reflect those goals and priorities. And then the third part of that, back to the question that Jennifer had around frequency of updates to these rules, and a question around what is the frequency for update to these rules. So 3 questions really. Thank you.
You're really taxing my ability to respond on memory there. I picked up on one of the initial things you said there, if SCORP informs or does not inform these rules. I would say Michelle, you can chime in here. I don't know if there's really a direct correlation from SCORP to these rules.
No, the SCORP is a 5-year plan, and these rules, as far as this might answer the last question, is frequency, is that, it really should only happen when there's a need, like Steve was alluding to, which is really the impetus for this, is that we're anticipating that change and getting quite a bit more money. So that's why we're looking at them now. So SCORP does not necessarily inform the rulemaking process. It works together in the grant program process, but because that's a 5-year document, we don't want to be going back to rulemaking every 5 years. I think it's, I don't know if Katie can speak to that. Like if I don't think it's a thing that we do like on a periodic basis or on any calendar.
Yeah.
I guess. And SCORP, the next SCORP is in process right now. So to some of those questions, and I can't remember all 3 of your questions, but really that informs, it's a statewide planning document. So it should inform statewide type of things and be there as a planning document for our local communities and federal, state as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the reason I asked the question is conversation specifically around small cities and the potential proportion of the share of LGGP funds. In that question, I think we could look to SCORP for direction on how to write rules in the future. specific to LGGP and potentially other grants, so that the goals, the funding matches the goals, the statewide goals and local goals. So thank you.
I would add that we do look at rules and to see if they need to be updated on a regular basis, and you're supposed to look at them every 5 years, but doesn't mean that we open rulemaking. It would just be an agency review to see if there's a need for rulemaking. We also can update rules and change rules based on need at any point.
Hey, Katie, does it take commission action to open rules, or can it be done administratively?
It takes commission action to open and to adopt.
Tom, you had your hand up earlier. Did you get your question asked, or?
Thanks, Mark. Well, I was just going to comment on what Bob said, but I think I'll wait till we get down to number 6.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Let's just pick up with point number 2, and that's raising the maximum award for large grants from $750,000 up to $1 million. And again, this is in response to number 1, inflation, and number 2, the likelihood of having more money to work with and the ability to actually tackle some larger projects. Any comment on that?
Is it set at $1 million? The copy I got says it didn't make a change.
That's what I was going to mention too, Mark. My copy that was sent out left it at 750, and I was going to propose going up to $1 million. Is that what you're proposing?
Oh, we should have left it that way. Then it would have been your idea. We'd given you credit.
It was Don's idea. Don was heading that way, I could tell.
Actually, I was gonna suggest that we double it. And the reason why is it costs, usually, at least for us, it costs more money to develop a park than it does to buy the land. Yet we're giving $1.5 million for land and less money for the development. Like for a neighborhood park, it might cost us about less than $1 million to buy it. And it might cost us $1.5 million to $2 million to develop it. For community parks, we're working on one right now. We paid $3.5 million for the land. It's going to cost us $20 million to develop it.
Wow.
So it seems that the development cost is higher than the acquisition cost. And so I would propose that given the amount of money's going up so much that we double that.
Interesting.
Double
Yep.
to 1.5 from 750. Is that your recommendation?
And my recommendation's on number 2 to go from 750 to 1.5. Is that what you said?
That's what I asked. Yes.
Yes. That would be my suggestion.
Interesting. Any other comments about that?
Given the price of construction and the amount of money that the growth in the grant program, I don't think it's unreasonable at all.
Okay.
Mark?
Yes.
But if you did that, couldn't that negatively affect the smaller communities? I mean, if we're using up these funds for these larger projects, seems like it might affect the smaller communities. And
I think Tom might have frozen on us there. I don't know if you can still hear us, Tom, but I think keep in mind that we would still have we'd still earmark at least 15% of the funds for small communities, if not 20. So at least those funds would still be earmarked for small communities.
Mark, can I clarify that real quick?
Sure.
Because I wanted to clarify, when we were talking about small grants, it sounded like some folks were kind of maybe mixing or commingling small grants with small communities. Large communities can apply for small grants. They're not based off the size of the community, just the project size.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I guess I'll just continue then. We were talking about number 1, and then we kind of went on to 2 and 3. If the group is fine with going to 20% of available funds for small grants, I could get there as well. It would be nice in rule if it said something, another sentence in there, that any unused funds will be, if not used of that 20%, would be utilized for the large grant program. I mean, you mentioned that that's how you guys do it, but we all know people changed positions and everything else, and just to kind of have that memorialized would be nice.
Okay, good point.
So, and Mark, once again, when it comes to number one, that doesn't necessarily mean that just because you get a request for, up to 20% of that money, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to fund every one of those, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then I would, the other thing while I'm speaking is I agree with Don's comments regarding number two, going to 1.5 million, I think is certainly something that's warranted in today's environment. And I guess while we're discussing that, when it comes to the smaller communities and helping those smaller communities out, just a question: has anybody recently looked at the definition of what a smaller community is? Maybe it hasn't changed that much, 25 to the 25,000 and 50,000, just as population increases in the state. Some of those smaller communities, are they still fitting in those? And does that need to be adjusted at all? Are those tied to anything from state economic development or that defines what a small community is?
The only thing that I have personally looked at recently is just the PSU population data, and kind of, just look at an Excel spreadsheet of where those communities land. And I had the numbers in my head at one point. I don't remember right now, but it's X number of communities land under 25,000, another X number of communities land under 30,000. So, and I think that that population group of cities has pretty much stayed about the same, I believe, over time. It's not like I don't think population increases bumped those very many cities from the small grant category or the small population up to a larger population threshold. But I can't say that definitively. That's the impression I remember from the last time I looked at PSU numbers. Jim, I see your hand.
Thanks. Yes. I really, I'm basing this on my time on the committee and the applications that we reviewed. And I am in complete support of upping the amount of money for small grants. The other committee member was absolutely correct that larger communities could apply for a small grant, and some do. But I would say that the majority are smaller communities. And then Mark, following your thought on the PSU criteria for smaller communities, that's great. But coming out of understanding that there is an opportunity to adjust rules if needed, understanding that we're coming out of COVID and smaller communities, every community's been affected, but smaller communities have less opportunity to match and provide support for a grant. And those smaller grants make a huge difference in this time. Maybe there's the time in the future to adjust this back. I don't know. But for now, I really support that. And then the idea with inflation and with cost changing, and same, with the larger grants, and if it's a larger community or a smaller community, it doesn't matter. The effect is still the same. And so to have funds available and to support those communities makes a lot of sense to me. I guess it's just my own soft spot for the smaller communities, that we saw way too many of them come in with absolutely great applications, but just not enough match, or just not enough. They just almost were there, but didn't quite make it. Maybe this is an opportunity for them.
I don't know if you can hear me. Oh, there we go.
Even for the agency I came from.
Jim, you froze up on us there on the last little bit of your comments. Hopefully we'll get you back. In the meantime, let's go to Tom and maybe Jim can rejoin us here in a minute. You there, Tom?
I am, Mark. I think that in reference to number 2 here, I think bumping that up to 1.5 will drain the pot quick enough where it won't be fair to the smaller communities. The smaller communities, they're not asking, at least from what I've seen on a term of LGGP, they're not asking for the 1.5s a lot of times. But it's larger than the small grant request. And I know you're forecasting a windfall of funds coming in. But until that time we see those funds coming in, I just be a little bit hesitant to double from 750 to 1.5.
Okay.
For what it's
Ariel?
worth.
Thanks. So question and a comment. Right now, it looks like the rules are simply just divided between small grants versus large grants. And I understand that that's not applicable to size of city or jurisdiction, right? Is there another place where it is structured around the size of the community? The reason I ask is for other funding opportunities, other resources out there. There's often 2 pots, one for smaller communities and one for larger, with the recognition that smaller, more rural communities have less capacity, less staff ability and expertise to write a competitive grant. And it's not fair to have these smaller jurisdictions compete against the larger, regardless of size of grant, right? So I'm just curious if that's been a consideration, or maybe I'm missing it somewhere, or if that's something to consider.
The population thresholds are listed later on here in the rules. Was
Okay.
that what you were asking?
Yeah, and what that interplay is between the large grant and small grant, because I'm hearing that small grant doesn't necessarily mean small community, right? Small jurisdiction, but that sometimes the small grants aren't quite enough. So I'm just curious if we should be looking at a different way to structure it entirely or not.
Well, I did look at past several years of grant awards, and I actually think we are helping more. The awards are kind of, even in both categories, are actually really, overall, when you put everything together, more small communities are being assisted than large communities. And now, as far as all the dollar amounts, I didn't look into specifically that. But in both the large grant competition and small grant competition, it seems to be that there aren't really small communities missing out. Although I do agree with, I think, what Tom said earlier, is that sometimes, or maybe it was, I think it was Jim who said that, sometimes they just don't have all of the match together. But we did do some research, and we really don't necessarily see that they're having problems competing in that large grant pool. Maybe sometimes there's an occasional project that won't compete well in there, but that's what we found. But we also do have, where Mark has pulled up, that there's lower match thresholds for smaller communities. And so that's where we kind of address that. And then I do want to add, just since we were talking about the fact that any size community can compete in the small grant or the large grant pool, I will say that probably 90% of the applications we get in the small grant category are from small communities. Every once in a while, you'll see a larger, community come in and ask for $75,000, which is the maximum right now, because they have a smaller project. It's not one of their larger scale projects, so they're looking to add maybe one restroom somewhere. And so, but even looking at that, it really, even though the small grant category is about the size of the grant, it really does attract more smaller communities.
Thanks, that's helpful. Yeah, if it's not an issue and you don't feel like the smaller communities or jurisdictions aren't, still have access and are able to compete, then you can ignore my suggestion. I just thought I'd flag that, just being familiar with other programs, how they do it.
Yeah, no, and that's a good suggestion. And I think that one of the things that we have made as a recommendation here would, if we found that to be happening, especially once we get this, 25% of the overall budget, if we find that happening, it gives us the flexibility to actually do something like what you're talking about. But right now, in the funding level we have not experienced that.
That's great. Thank you. To me, again, not being familiar with this program, to me, it speaks to an accessible grant process and application that's not too cumbersome or complicated. So I hope that's the case. And that's what it sounds like. And just to a point someone was making earlier, the question raised about has there been a shift in population? You know, are there more cities above the 25,000 threshold? I think there's more movement between the 10,000 threshold, which applies to other programs and areas. And I think I agree with the person who said that they think it's been, you know, there hasn't been too much of a shift there, but I haven't looked at the numbers in detail recently.
Thanks, Ariel. Steve, you had a question, and then Jennifer.
Yeah, I'll just keep it short. I guess my comment was going to be, there's a lot of discussion around the small communities, and I'll be the guy that everybody thinks is the big bully or jerk. I get that, but I guess I would just use caution. You know, I mean, to Michelle's point, to 20% of the funds are set aside from small grants. 90% of that is being used by small communities, and then we're setting aside another 10% specifically to small communities, and small communities have less match requirement. Boy, and then we don't bump up, you know, the section number 2 to 1.5 when, you know, larger communities are seeing, you know, obviously the construction impacts. It really puts us down this tunnel of hamstringing some of the good projects in the state that need to move forward for you know, aiming for the small communities, when it sounds like from Michelle that there's not really this big unmet need in the small communities there. So as we continue that discussion, I guess I just urge us to be aware that some of the larger communities have a stake at this as well.
Thanks, Steve. Jennifer?
Apologies, I'm going to say a smaller community thing again. It would be interesting to know of those smaller communities, because I did look at the last few years and I did see that there was quite a lot of small communities represented. I would be curious just at the analytics as to what is how does special districts compare to municipalities with that? Because municipalities typically, even in a smaller community, have a lot more infrastructure and are able to kind of have the capacity to do a grant like this. So just curiosity, I don't know if that information is out there, but if that would be curious to compare if that is a barrier for some of our smaller districts.
The information is out there. I don't have a statistic in my head. I'd like to think that in any small grant cycle, in any grant cycle, we see both large and small parks and rec districts in the mix of applicants on a regular basis. I don't have a number or a statistic for you though, Jennifer. Okay, coming back to Jim. Jim, were you able to finish your comment? You kind of froze up there at the last minute, and I just want to make sure you got your complete thought out there.
I appreciate that, Mark. Thank you. I made a career out of freezing up, so that's okay. No, I guess my final point on that is that upping the available funds for smaller communities provides more opportunities. Upping the funds for larger communities, Don Horton making a really good point about his project and how the cost went way up. If the resources are available, we're coming out of COVID, we have communities that are coming back, that they're looking for funding opportunities, matching opportunities like this. I think the combination of the two makes a lot of sense to me. So thanks for asking.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. Thanks, Jim. Dawn and then Ariel.
I don't want to belittle this too much more. I am in support of making it more flexible on the small grants. I do think it's a good idea. It doesn't mean that you're going to be spending all that money on the small grants, but that would mean if you gave $100,000 out for every single small grant, you'd be administering 60 grants a year. You know, once we get to the new dollar amount, and I would be shocked if we're giving 60 grants a year, but having the opportunity to do that, I don't think is a bad thing. I think it's I think it's actually good. And I do think it helps smaller communities because it's primarily smaller communities that are applying for those grants. So I think I could be in support of that, but I'm also strongly encouraging, I think, to increase number 2 to 1.5.
Okay.
That also doesn't mean you're giving out 1.5 to everybody. It means you have the flexibility going up to 1.5. So I think it increases the flexibility of number 2, just like it does for number 1.
Historically, I think our average grant award, average mean in the large grant category, for years it was 245,000, then it inched up to 303,000. And in this last cycle, now granted we had more applicants, they had more match money to work with, and we had more money to work with. We saw a record number of requests for 750,000 in this particular cycle. So this year's average grant award went up pretty significantly. And we put in $1 million in here just thinking that was a reasonable route to go. You're all encouraging us to go a little higher, which we're kind of we didn't think of that. We didn't know you'd go for higher. So we'll certainly take that into good consideration. Just curious, just to by a show of hands, who all would be in favor of going from, in the large grant category, the maximum grant award from 1 million to 1.5? Show of hands. Okay, those that would not be in favor, they think 1 million is a better number. Okay, 3 of you in that category, 5 in the other. So we'll certainly give that some more thought. Okay, I'm checking back with the hands raised. Tom?
Mark, it's at $750,000 now. It's been proposed at 1.5. What about meeting in the center? That seems like a pretty considerable jump. We're talking about doubling it. Wouldn't it make more sense to slowly increase it in increments instead of just doubling it?
It's a good question, Tom. You know, we're kind of trying to crystal ball this thing. So, you know, it's easier to make these kind of changes looking at past data, and we're looking at a future change. So we don't have data to go on. We're just trying to guess the future. So, but that's certainly a possibility, certainly an option. Bob?
Just a couple of things. The reason why I'm interested in maintaining it at $1 million is part of it is when we looked at the formula before, it was 75,000 for small grants and 750 for large grants. You know, what is that? 10 times as much. And that's just staying consistent with sort of that ratio that was already there. And also I was around when the original committee was formed, when the original rules were formed. And I remember our large grants were $500,000 back then, and we didn't have additional money, didn't have any other designation for acquisition. It was at 500,000. So it's wise for us to be looking at this. I just don't know that when we look at 1.5, how many agencies are really going to be able to match that in those large grants. It's going to be a handful of the larger agencies, most likely, that are going to be able to do that. And with that said, I understand Don's issues and Tualatin Hills issues, but this is something that's for statewide. And so I just look at it and I'm thinking it's a lot of money to be setting up there as a match. If in any one year, if somebody did come in at 1.5 for a project, that's 10% of the money coming out of the pot, out of the $15 million available in 1 year to one agency. So it's just a number of things that I was concerned with by moving it up that far this quick.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Bob. Well, appreciate all your input on that. That gives us some additional things to think about. So we certainly appreciate all of that. Just to kind of keep things moving along here. Point number 3, raising acquisitions up to 1.5. Bob, is your hand up on this one again?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and speak. I wasn't going to, but I think what Don said earlier was if we were to raise the other one to 1.5, lowering this to $1 million, to me, it's like some of these projects, we may dedicate funds and then never see anything happen with a project for a long time. I certainly like the grant program to really show results on the ground right away. So I just have a concerns about, again, about spending this type of money out of the local government grant program from acquisitions for 1.5, and also from what Don was saying earlier about let's get projects and get construction going and get people utilizing the park. Anyway, that's just my 2 cents again.
So would you recommend leaving the acquisition level at 1 million as opposed to moving it up to 1.5? Is that what your suggestion is?
Yes.
Okay. Tom, go ahead.
Well, I agree with most things that Bob has said. I can't get there with this. I think, some of the most significant projects we've seen over the past 4 years were projects that were really significant, like saving land in the along Walla Lake there from development, or down in Klamath Falls, accessing a large parcel. I just think more significant projects of acquiring land that will benefit generations to come versus individual projects that, that have a 20, 25-year lifespan.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Any other discussion on that? Oh, Ross, I'm sorry, Ross, your little hand blends right in with your logo. I have to look twice.
I'm noticing that. I'm sorry. I may switch up my background here. Sorry about that. Yeah, I just think, this is an opportunity to raise both of these to a higher level, provides opportunity for communities to be more aspirational, to think big, to dream about the projects that they currently do not have money for. LGGP represents the primary source for most agencies and cities and counties to be bold, to dream big and make some bigger, larger scope projects happen. And if the cap is lower, that may prohibit communities to even venture to dream about what's next. And so I would advocate for raising these caps, and they're just that, they're caps. You may not have many applicants that submit an application for the full potential amount. As was brought up, communities may not have the match. But at least there's an opportunity for communities to start to dream and think about things differently. And it creates an opportunity for the committee awarding grants to consider those larger applicants and applications, and to think about this fund investing in some larger scale projects. So thanks.
Very good. Tom, you still have a hand up. I'm just wondering if that's a carryover from the last one, or do you have a new comment? Okay, very good. Okay, any more discussion on these levels, these thresholds? Okay, moving on. Number 4 just gives us a little more added flexibility, more or less. And then we've already briefly discussed point number 6, just kind of gives us an additional latitude to consider some enhancements to smaller communities. Any discussion on that? Tom?
Yeah, I think Bob mentioned this earlier, and I fully agree. I think that in consultation with the committee might be a good add. I think it's a cleaner process. It avoids any speculation or potential bias. And I just think it'd be a lot cleaner if we added those few words in.
Referring to the committee?
Mark, there where you have it highlighted, the director, I think that's where you intended to put that in. So I think it would be in consultation with the director or in consultation with the committee would go in there. The
Okay.
director may dedicate a portion. So I made note of it here.
Very good. Thank you.
And while I'm talking, I'm just gonna shout out a time check here. It's 2:20. So we'll see where we're at when we're getting closer to the end time for this meeting. But anyway, just throwing that out there.
And we'll probably interject a break here in the next few minutes too. So we referenced bicycle and pedestrian projects. This is what we were talking about earlier in that definition of bicycles, possibly referring back to this. At least we were talking about that being keeping it as is, just for sake of consistency for the time being. This all sunsets in 2025. Again, just some syntax changes. Talks about the application process. Dawn, a question, comment? I think you're muted, Dawn.
Number 6, I like in consultation with a committee or something along those lines. Do we also want to put a cap on that? I mean, the way it reads here, she could set the entire amount aside to give out herself.
I agree with Donna. I went through track changes and added some stuff in here, and I'm reading my version and thinking it's the one Mark's referring to. And I had actually put in there up to 10% or some amount. I think that there should be an up to amount in there.
Okay, good suggestion.
I think I even referenced that 10% earlier, and you guys were probably all, what the heck's he talking about? Because I'm the only one who saw it.
Well, but I think also if we're in consultation with the committee, you're also getting that ability to control how many of those dollars go that route. So Steve, I could go with the 10% or some number, but I still think that's why I think it's important that the committee be involved in that process.
Okay, very good.
I would agree with that, Don. Bob, the one thing I would say is in consultation is in consultation. Yeah, consulting with them, not at their direction. So a little bit of more firm language in there would be nice.
Okay, any more comments on that one? Moving on. This is a line that was added by our leadership team.
I'm sorry, I was having some technical difficulties again. Did you say something?
I just said that this was a line that was added by our leadership team, recommended by our leadership team. Just gives one more option of a type of plan that can be referenced to substantiate a local government grant project. Any comments on that?
I do.
Don?
I just think that there ought to be some parameters on this. You know, one, I think it needs to be related to an agency's outdoor recreation plan of some type, not just any project. I know that it's kind of worded that way already. It would be good to know what examples of some of these projects might be, to see if they fit the others, and to SCORP, you know, how does SCORP play in this? It looks like we want to update SCORP on addressing this climate action plan needs statewide before we would agree to give out LGGP money for that purpose.
Okay.
I just think it needs more direction and more parameters. I'm all for doing it, but right now it's pretty wide open.
Thanks, Don. Brian?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Don was saying. I think it would need to be fleshed out far more. I know it does say outdoor recreation elements of a climate change plan, but we don't know where that climate change adaptation plan is coming from. And it should be a priority of the local Parks and Recreation District Department. That's what these funds are meant for. And I would not want to see other projects being funded that are from outside agencies.
I'm not tracking with you on that. What do you mean from outside agencies?
If there's the potential that someone that is not a Parks and Recreation agency, if they've got a recreation element, something that's considered a recreation element in their climate change adaptation plan, that it could be funded. That it, or the climate change adaptation plan is not something that is part of a Parks and Recreation plan. I, like Don saying, I think it just needs to be fleshed out. I'd love to know what examples are we talking about? Just some idea of what we're talking about.
Okay.
Maybe this could be addressed in definitions a little bit more to help flesh that out some.
Okay. Ariel?
Yeah, I appreciate this needing a little more definition. I will say, being at other rulemaking tables in other agencies and spaces around climate change, I read this as with what is an understanding of what it's intended at, which is, I think a lot of cities are including climate change factors in their climate change adaptation plans in their master plans, comprehensive plans. And this is things like, increasing the amount of splash pads or cooling areas or, community space for heat events, those kinds of things. And so to me, this doesn't read as like expanding eligible entities. I would think that the other definitions, like the door to get into this program, you still have to be a parks entity. So I would think those would keep kind of like extra entities for coming in for these dollars. I think this is just kind of meant to like connect the dots. So I think I know what it's nodding at, but I can see where it could be confusing.
Very good. Thanks, Ariel.
Yeah, Mark, if I could just follow up on that. Sure. I think I know what the intention is as well. I've just been around a long while, and their intention is not always followed. And especially when the people in the room change years from now. And I've had some bad experiences with what I have heard was the intention and what actually came to bear later on. And so the rules are open. Now's the time to clarify that, not later on.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Any other comments? Jennifer?
I actually have a comment on something before that. And so if there's another comment on the climate change, I'll let them speak.
Okay, go ahead, Don.
I guess the only other comment that I have is that this would also limit the number of agencies that could even apply for that. One, they'd have to have a plan, and two, they'd have to have an outdoor element. And there's a lot of communities that can do good things in parks to help climate change that won't have a plan or won't have an outdoor element within a plan. So I think better definitions on what that could fund is more important than whether or not an agency has a plan.
Don, that's a good point. I think we would want to point out the word "or" right here. Yeah. We would not be a requirement. This would just be one other additional type plan that they could refer to. It'd have to be an eligible applicant, number one, and they have a collection of plans that they can present, either the SCORP or elements of a local comprehensive plan or a local master plan. Or again, there's another "or" in here, outdoor recreation elements of locally adopted climate change plans.
Well, then I guess to the point that a couple of us are making, I don't know what this means then.
We don't either.
So
No, I say that flippantly, and I don't mean to be flippant about it, but it is, I mean, we're in new territory, let's face it.
Yeah.
You know, and this is going to be a growing trend, and it's going to be probably the larger jurisdictions that are going to come up with these plans. So it'll be interesting to see if at all. I assume they will, but. Any other comments before we move on to Jennifer's? Okay, Jennifer, you wanted to refer back to something else?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. It sounds like a lot of the people that are on the committee are talking about how in the past, it seems like one of the biggest barriers to access to these funds is those matching dollars. And so are those matching requirements being considered at all? And would now be the time to look at those, or is that on the table?
Now is the time. We certainly could. It hasn't, you know, we haven't prepared that as part of our discussion today, but we're certainly open to that.
I think did we already look at those, or we haven't gotten to that?
No, they were, we just passed them, Michelle. They're the next page up
Mm,
under matching requirements.
this is where we are? Is this the page up or the page down? Is this,
Page up,
okay.
page backwards.
Here it is. Yeah. And so, yeah, this is, you know, what we've sent out are just draft changes that basically staff has put in here and then sent them out to you so that you could come up with your comments and suggestions. And so, yeah, if you had something after looking at this, yeah, this is the time.
I definitely think those, I mean, based on what I hear in the communities and then also what I'm hearing from people who served on these grant evaluations before, I think that those percentages need to be looked at, especially for wanting to, you know, we do have a lot of small communities in Oregon, and yes, it sounds like a lot of them are accessing these funds, but there's a lot of them that aren't. And so now's the time, I think, to really consider if some of those are too high. But I haven't sat on the evaluation committee before either. So I'd be looking to people who've sat on that evaluation committee who have a little bit more of an understanding as to that.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to know if not being able to meet the match is what's keeping the majority. It might be one and two or three here or there, or if it's just staffing capacity. The smaller communities don't have the staff capacity to plan and do the project development, et cetera. And if it is the latter of the two, and match requirement necessarily isn't the thing that's keeping the majority of folks out, then you kind of by default start diluting the program a little bit. So I think more information, from my perspective, more information on what is keeping people from applying would be needed for me to feel comfortable with tweaking the matching requirements too much.
Agreed. I was wondering the same thing about the capacity. So thank you for bringing that up, Steve.
I'm sure you're probably already aware of this, but just to clarify that particularly like in the smaller communities where they require a 20% match, that can be a good chunk of that can be their own staff account labor if that's what they have to come in the door with. Bob, I see your hand.
Yeah, I was just, I think that the match, or from what I could tell from the time that I served on the LGGP grant committee in land and water, that, you know, these type of matches for small community are reasonable, as you just said, Mark, about all the in-kind that they can bring to the table. What I see in my experience since I retired is that a lot of these agencies don't have planning capacity, and being able to make sure that we've got the ability within this grant program to provide them planning assistance, not just site plan, but maybe community planning assistance when it comes to recreation, may be a better way to assist them than reducing any of the match requirements. So it may be just the way that we manage the program, advertise the program, or we need to dedicate some funds specifically to that and make sure that that is available to those small communities.
Thanks, Bob. Michael?
I just wanted to wholeheartedly agree with what Bob just said. I think planning assistance could be really helpful for a lot of small communities that have really capacity. Another suggestion is perhaps the director could be given some discretion to ignore the caps in certain situations if they felt it was a really good project.
Okay, I think that actually is written in here at the very end of the form, but that's a good point.
Yeah.
And also just to further clarify, within the small grant category, we do allocate $300,000 every biennium for small community planning grants. And those are set on communities of 5,000 and communities of 10,000. And that's 20% match for the smaller group, 40% match for the larger group.
So some small communities may not have the capacity to go after those planning grants either.
I'm sure that's possible. Yeah.
And so, Mark, that's not in the rules. That, from what I could tell, did I miss something that's in the rules about you're setting aside 300,000?
You know, you're right. That is not in the rules.
So I had a note before about planning grants, and so maybe we need to bring that back as part of what we're doing here, and maybe it needs to be more than 300,000 with some of the costs of consultants these days, and having these folks out in some of these rural communities. There's travel costs. There's a lot of expenses. I know that we can pick up some of it the way that we're working today, but it's something that I would recommend that we look at. And then one other thing, since I'm on the line and I do have to leave right at 3 o'clock, I want to make sure that we talk about waiver retroactivity. I know we do in the the opportunity grant, but I didn't see anything in here about that. And is that something that we're doing with the local government grant program?
For moving ahead, like on property purchase and then moving ahead with, yeah, it is a part of the local government grant program. It's in the manual. I can't remember if it's actually in here or not. Do you remember, Michelle?
I don't know if it's in rule, but it is in the manual, which the manual is covered in the rules. So we do it. We'll do waivers.
As long as it's there, I don't really care. I just think it's a valuable tool for so many of these communities that have an opportunity to get a piece of property, then can utilize that to work for their match. And some of these small communities, they may get somebody donate something a year ago for a potential park, and having that available as a match would be very helpful to them.
Yeah, that's spelled out pretty specifically in the local government manual.
Great.
Are we speaking of like pre-agreement match? Is that what we're talking about?
No, pre-agreement match is also covered in the manual. What Bob is referring to, I believe, is getting a waiver of retroactivity in order to purchase property before the grant cycle. So if you have an opportunity to purchase property, but the next grant cycle isn't for 6 months, then they can contact Mark, and then I can issue a waiver that allows that property to be preserved for the next grant cycle. It does have to be in the next grant cycle, is how we have it in our manual, where they do come to the committee and then apply for that project. And so there's a little bit of a risk for the applicant because they're already purchased the property. But we also do allow, if they didn't get the acquisition grant, we would allow recently acquired property to be used as match in a development grant. So I believe that's what Bob was referring to, and we do that. I did want to just mention one thing before I lose my train of thought, Mark, on the planning grants. What percentage of planning grants do we typically fund the request versus how many we fund on planning?
In recent years, we've been able to fund between 90 and 100%. And we usually have 4 to 6 applications for small community planning grants per year. This year, we were able to fund 10. Well, this year I say, but we had 2 years worth of funding. So that's kind of an anomaly, but
You found it.
that's good. Great. I still see someone's got their mic open that's catching some background noise there, but Don, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if State Parks has ever done any surveying of communities to ask the question, have they applied for grants? And if not, what is the reasons why they're not applying?
We have not done that with small communities to my knowledge. And that's a very good suggestion. And
I mean, some of them may not have a need, you know, some of them may be a host of reasons why they're unable to apply for those grants. It seems like we're trying to solve a problem when we don't fully understand the problem yet. And that may be something in the future that as a part of the scope or something that we may want to look at funding needs for these smaller communities and what the challenges are.
very good. Michael, again. I think he's just.
Sorry, that's
oh,
the old hand. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Ariel.
Oh, I support that suggestion. It would be great to get a sense of who hasn't applied. I also don't know if like you've just put these recent grants on a map to kind of see where the gaps are and maybe just targeted reaching out to those folks. It would be really useful to have that information.
I agree. Having some survey data would really be wonderful on this. So, Katie, I'm just going to interject real quick. Did you plan any kind of a break into this schedule, or were we scheduled till 4?
No, we are actually only scheduled till 3.
Oh, okay.
But it looks like we're going to need to do our second meeting that we have blocked out. So that would be September 2nd at 10 a.m.
To cover county opportunity?
Well, I think to maybe even cover the rest of this. I'm not sure if you have 20 minutes left, how much.
I'm guessing the rest of the material that we're going through is going to be pretty mundane, I think. I think we've
Never
covered
know.
Well, and we also need to cover the fiscal and economic impact piece.
Okay, well, what's your suggestion? I'll go with your guidance.
So the September 2nd was the other date that worked for people. Does that still work for a majority of the committee? It looks like I don't see anybody that's screaming that's not going to work. So,
This is Jim. I'm on grandfather duty that day, and so I will not be available.
okay. Well, if we can keep that meeting, then we can just keep working until 3 and then start again on September 2nd and finish up here and do the economic and fiscal impact piece.
Okay, very good. So picking up where we left off, again, this is just some grammatic changes is all. So we've added just clarification on some of the definitions, required documents for an application. Nothing major here. Feel free to shout out or raise a hand if you see something you want to comment on.
I just wanted to ask a clarifying question on F, preliminary plans and specifications for construction projects. Are specifications really coming in on most of these projects, or are we sort of looking away from that?
If something has actually been already engineered and designed, then yes, we do get very clear specifications. If it's just in a concept plan, then obviously we don't. Unless, of course, it depends on how you define specifications. If it's specifications within the budget, as in, we anticipate putting in X number of picnic tables, X number of picnic shelters, X number of feet of sidewalk, then those kind of specifications are usually provided, yes.
Yeah, just my experience has been that it's been more like that, Mark, unless the project's really scoped out well and they've had engineers involved in all that. And so I don't want that to keep somebody from applying or get knocked down in their rating if it's a simpler type of specification that we're going for here.
Sure, understood. Okay, we'll flag that. Don?
So I just have a comment in relation to E. And E is talking about having a long-term, and it says generally not less than 25 years. Does that mean that less than 25 years is okay?
I believe we have a language in the manual that discusses if it's like this with a federal agency and there's X number of years left on the lease, and there's language that says with the intent to renew, if they can go ahead and get some sort of confirmation from, say, like Army Corps of Engineers or something like that, that the intent is to renew, then that's workable.
So the intent though is for 25 or more, but that's not what this says. It says generally less than 25, which to me that means it could, or generally more than 25, which to me that means it could be less than 25.
It's mostly not, though. We either in the manual we go into more detail and require that it's at least 25 years, or that we have some kind of some kind of documentation that would show that it could be extended to 25 years. But I mean, if somebody came in and they had a lease that was like 24.5 years, then this gives us the flexibility to do that. So
I would recommend further down in the document under conversion requirements, in section 1, it actually has that language, Mark, you were referencing. Leases for federally owned property must be at least 25. If it is less than 25, I would suggest cutting those few sentences out, or at least copying them and moving them further up into the area you were just reviewing, because that's explains the situation of what to do in that case.
Is that what you're referring to right there, Steve?
Correct. A lot of us counties, that applies directly to us. So if you just see that right up top and you don't know that you can get the intent to renew letter, might continue on.
Okay. So going back up where we were. Go ahead and raise a hand or give a shout out if you see anything you wanted to comment on. Everything here has basically just been kind of just tuned up. Yeah, go ahead, Don.
Somebody let Don know he's muted.
You're muted, Don.
Sorry about that. Under the new letter K, you've crossed out that section. It's government and government inquiries for tribal. Does that mean we do not have to get tribal consultation any longer?
Not for local government.
Okay.
And that's
just for LWCF?
Yes. And Michelle, you can correct me on this if I'm getting it wrong, but part of this is covered by our agreement between our own State Historic Preservation Office and tribal governments. That there's kind of an umbrella agreement there on how these are handled.
Okay.
Am I getting that right, Michelle?
yeah, I mean, these get all of our grant applications go through SHPO and are reviewed. Yeah. But yeah, the like a 106 tribal consultation, cultural resource type of thing is only required for any projects with a federal nexus. So we still are doing the SHPO process.
Yeah.
Mark, I had a comment on section H right there.
Time extensions?
Sorry, G, section G.
Okay.
I was just going to suggest adding on to the case-by-case basis, something to the effect of, so long as the amendment is substantially aligned with the original submitted scope of work, or just you can apply for an amendment as long as it's, you know, generally for what the grant was awarded for.
Okay. That is 7G. Donna, do you have a comment? See your hand?
Yeah, under appraisals,
Okay.
it requires an appraisal review. Have y'all ever had a problem with an appraisal that appraisal review has picked up on? That's just you have?
I'm sorry,
So
what?
you've had appraisals by a licensed appraiser, and then the review person had an issue with it? Okay, then it's probably good to leave it in there.
Typically referred to as a desk review.
Yeah.
Hey, Mark, is there any need to put a time frame under which you apply for that time extension versus just saying prior to the expiration of the approved project? Is it 30 or 60 days? Because you guys have to have time to review the request. And so what happens if somebody just makes it on the day of? Is the grant good or not good? It's expired, you know? So is there something that this may be some administratively that you guys want to do, and maybe it's in the manual as well, but when I looked at that, I thought, oh, I could see Bob Kiefer when he was running things, taking it down to the last minute.
Not only Bob Kiefer, it is a lot of other folks. But we do have it in our grant agreement and in our manual, and it is 30 days. However, because it's not in rule, that does give us flexibility for Bob Kiefer asking the day before it expires, or, you know, sometimes it happens the day after, and we have ways to handle that, you know, that's vetted through DOJ. So I'm just interjecting right now because we do only have 9 minutes left. We do have to do that economic review piece discussion. So we could either, I know that at least one of you, I think maybe somebody said they had to go right at 3, maybe that was you, Bob. So we could either wrap this up, have that discussion, wrap this up, and then, you know, adjourn and discuss this when we meet again on the 2nd. Or we can stay late if anybody is willing or available to stay late. And I don't know about staff or all of that too. So just wanted to kind of interject before we get too much further, because I think we would need to stop here and start having that other piece of the agenda taken care of. Okay, we got one person, Michael can stay till 3:15. What is anybody have any thoughts on that?
I can certainly stay later if need be.
Me as well.
Me too.
I can stay. It's Jim.
And how many people have to go right at 3? Bob. Okay. Well, since Bob has to go, maybe we should, I don't know if anybody has any ideas on that. Maybe we should just wrap up and then reconvene on the 2nd.
Well,
Sounds
you
like
don't
we have
need
to
me
reconvene.
for it.
Sounds like we have to reconvene on the 2nd regardless.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get to that. So just keep jotting down your ideas, and Katie just put a link in there to register for that meeting, and we can set out a reminder to do that. And then let's see if I said I'm having some computer difficulties, but let me get to the okay.
You want to go back to the PowerPoint, Michelle, or something else?
Yeah, I was looking, I don't have access to my PowerPoint right now, so that's kind of throwing me off, but Katie, maybe you can help me out with because I don't have access to my slides or discussion piece on this part, if you could.
And we can do the economic piece at the next meeting. We just have to do it within
this meeting
of the RAC.
Okay,
So-
okay, well then let's do that
long-
if most people are able. I know that Jim's not able. So yeah, let's then we're gonna meet on the 2nd. Then I guess we have about 6 more minutes to continue discussion on the rules.
Okay, let me get back to that.
And maybe while Mark's doing that, Jim, or anybody that's not able to be here on the 2nd, if you have thoughts on the economic, fiscal, or racial equity impact of the proposed rules, if you want to email it to Michelle or I, that would be great.
That sounds fine. Thank you.
Okay, I think where we left off, we talked about covered that. I think the next topic was having to do with this added, we're talking about membership here now, membership on the actual committee, the advisory committee. This item H, 3 members of the public at large with at least 1 who represents a historically underrepresented community. In the past, it said ethnic diversity of the state's population. And we just thought this would give us a little more latitude, just kind of broaden the category a little bit, give us a little more flexibility here. We've had some challenges finding a person that represents the ethnic diversity in the state in the past.
Mark, wasn't this, my understanding was this was something, an executive order that required all state agencies on all committees to do this? That's what I've heard from ODOT.
Could be, I'm not aware of that.
I put this language in. We did this change from representing the ethnic diversity of the state's population in the land and water rulemaking. And so it's kind of just to match up with what we've been doing, and it's just more modern, really mostly more modern language.
Yeah, I agree with it, and I'm good. I was just clarifying. I thought there was an executive order that required it.
Well, I guess we're just, if there is, we're just meeting that without, I guess, knowing that.
Steve, are you saying the executive order is requiring historically underrepresented community or ethnic diversity of the state?
I'm not sure, one or the other. I'm not sure on that, Mark. I just went through this with the Area Commission on Transportation with ODOT, and they're going through all of their committees at state direction. And they had mentioned that all state agencies were required to do this. So that's what I assume.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm missing the hands here. Don, go ahead.
I just wonder, is there a state definition of what a historically underrepresented community is?
Michelle?
I can answer that.
Go ahead, Katie.
I don't know if Michelle got kicked off. We had that question. We just redid some rules for the Office of Outdoor Recs committee and had the same language, and there is not specifically. The governor's office has a report that has a definition in there, but it's not in statute, and there's not specifically.
So how do we assure that happens if there's not a definition of it?
It's pretty broad, and it provides that flexibility.
Okay.
And the intent. I mean, really the intent, it's really about intent, and the intent is to diversify our communities and reach out to people who haven't traditionally been involved.
Okay.
Michael?
So I just wanted to point out that this effort to provide for representation is only applying to the 3 at-large members. when really what would be ideal is for the overall board to have some members from a historically underrepresented committee. And I don't see a reason why the 3 at-large seats should particularly be required to have that feature. It seems like a better way to approach it might be to have a provision that the board has to have a certain number of seats overall, whether they are the at-large seats or a different seat.
That's a very good point. And in the past, actually, the way we've operated, if someone can meet 2 needs, we have certainly taken advantage of that in the past. But you bring up a very good point. I don't feel that we've ever felt ourselves limited by this.
So just to clarify, it does state that we need 3 at-large members and then at least 1 representing an underrepresented community. That is not, that's not necessarily saying that, someone representing counties east of the Cascades wouldn't also meet that representation. And we do, during the application, we do have an application or an interest form process, and we do look at all kinds of things, like besides that we have, different parts of the state covered and different sizes of communities. We look at every time we get an interest form and when we're filling a position, where are we lacking? Do we have a good balance of genders represented? Do we have a good balance of, parts of the state represented? So those are things that we do, on the staff review of these. So just throwing that out there.
Yeah, Michael, that's a really good observation, but we have always interpreted this as being at least 1 member within any of these categories. So I don't think we have been limited by that. So, but it's a good point.
So, Mark, we went by this, and this may not be the appropriate time to bring it up, because I just noticed when going through the County Opportunity Grant Program, the information about conversions in the National Park Service and being ineligible. I didn't realize at that time until I read that in there that was also in the local government grant rules for that conversion, or not being eligible if you have an open conversion. I'm wondering why state monies are being potentially withheld on a program that's federally funded. And that gives a big hammer to a federal agency that has nothing to do with state funding.
Good point.
I hear your point, and I definitely can address that and discuss it in more detail. We have hit 3 o'clock. I'm definitely not trying to avoid the topic, because I'm definitely open for that conversation and can speak to it a little bit more and why that's in there. I don't know that it actually says that if there's an open conversion, you're not eligible, but I'll take a closer look at that language, and we can definitely pick up there when we reconvene on the 2nd.
I just didn't want it to be forgotten about as we went through this. So, and like I said, I know it's not part of the rule changes specifically going on with the local government grant program, but that language is in there, and it's hits both programs. So I think it's worth a discussion. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, we've hit 3 o'clock, and what's the consensus of the group? We're gonna want to push through for another half hour or save this for the 2nd? Comments?
I'd say unless there's somebody who's like Jim, who's not going to be able to participate on the 2nd, I think we should wrap up. But I don't know if anybody, people are really anxious to stay on for a while. And I see Michael has his hand up, so maybe we can at least address that. And Tom.
I'm sorry, I still have my hand up.
Tom?
Mark, I'm going to need to leave, but feel free to go on without me. I'm sure I trust all of you and your decision-making ability. So, but I need to check out.
Very good. We understand. Thanks, Tom. Good to see you.
Bye.
Don?
Oh, I was just going to suggest that if we go ahead and check out now, that we may want to look at a third meeting, because these are going to last longer than what I think people thought that they were going to last, and getting on everyone's calendar is kind of hard to do. So we may want to go ahead and look out and do that.
Would perhaps maybe just setting more time aside, because this was only 2 hours. It is not, that much time. So maybe we could try on the 2nd to do set aside 3 hours, because then we just have a little bit of this to go, and then the county opportunity grants, which aren't quite as, I don't think, as involved.
Not near, I don't think.
That would be better for me if everybody else can do that.
My only concern with that is it's nice to have a last meeting to be able to look at revised language that OPRD brings back to us based on our comments. So in the next meeting, we're going to continue to discuss this and the local or the county opportunity grant program. And we're not going to be able to see wordsmithing or whatever to address some of our issues that we may or may not bring up. So if we had that meeting, talked about some continued thoughts, whatnot, and then we had a final meeting where OPRD could bring back some of that to address the concerns we brought up today, and through that next discussion, that's always helpful for me.
Couple things. One thing we could do is we have, we are kind of on a time frame for, requesting, going to rulemaking and then the open period. And so that we're trying to have new rules in place to implement for the January opening of the local government grant program. The county opportunity grant program, it'll open again around this time next year. And so another option is to hold off on the rulemaking for the county opportunity grant program, and then utilize September 2nd to finish up the local government grant rules, and just have it done that day. Also, those final rules are open for 30 days, once we've had all of your recommendations and we've done the changes based on your recommendations, and whatever else we put in there is open for public comment for a month.
I like that approach, Michelle, of circling back and continuing the discussion, and maybe looking at some of the revisions that your staff brings back based off of the discussion we had today, and just keeping the next meeting focused on LGGP. Frankly, I think, getting into the county opportunity grant program, 2/3 of the people on this call aren't necessarily affected by that program because it's specific to counties. So having a handful of other counties involved in that discussion, in addition to Brian and myself, might be helpful.
I agree with that. And Michelle, if we do what you're suggesting here, is it possible for you to get us a draft of what we've talked about today out so that we can review it before the next meeting, and then we can comment on that as well?
Yeah, I think we can, and we'll do our best to do that. It is, I think we can probably incorporate those. I will do my best to get those in there between Mark and myself. This rulemaking came at the most busy time for us, because Mark's in the middle of this grant cycle, but I think we can incorporate those changes, and we'll definitely have the notes that I've been taking, Ashley's been taking, and I know Mark's been jotting some down. So I think most of these we could probably get in there. And if you see that we've missed anything, we can address that on a second. But yeah, we will send you out another draft, second draft before the 2nd. Okay. Well, before I lose my, I can't believe that I've actually stayed on here, because the rest of my computer is just not working. So this is like some kind of internet miracle right now. But so it sounds like we will be reaching out to you with information about the meeting September 2nd, and we'll get you before that meeting second draft, and we'll reconvene then. So are there any comments for the good of the order before we depart this afternoon?
I just
Well,
would
yeah.
want to agree with the point that it might be good to get more county folks involved to talk about the specific county program.
Noted. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. All right. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us today and all your time and really thoughtful comments. This is really great. This has been a really good couple of hours we've spent here, and we will continue on September 2nd. Anything else from staff or the committee? Okay, with that, we'll